Bashar al-Assad granted political asylum in Russia. South Korean opposition will try again to impeach President Yoon. Good afternoon and Salam Malaysia Madani. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Mohana Priya and you're watching World Today. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and his family arrived in Moscow hours after they fled the country. A Kremlin source told Russian news agencies this comes as Russia, a key Assad ally, called for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council on the fast-changing situation on the ground in the war-torn country. The Kremlin source also said that the opposition, who ousted Assad in a lightning offensive, guaranteed the security of Russian army bases and diplomatic institutions on Syria's territory. Russia, Assad's biggest backer, along with Iran, holds a naval base in Tartus and a military airfield in Khmeim. Moscow's forces became militarily involved in the Syrian conflict in 2015, providing support for Assad's forces to crush the opposition in the bloody civil war. A Russian representative to the United Nations announced that Moscow had requested an emergency closed-door meeting of the UN Security Council on the situation in Syria for Monday afternoon. Meanwhile, Syrian opposition forces declared that they have taken Damascus in a lightning offensive on Sunday, sending Bashar al-Assad fleeing and ending 5 decades of Ba'ath rule in Syria. The president's reported departure comes less than 2 weeks since the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS group, launched its campaign challenging more than 5 decades of rule by the Assad family. The rapid development in Damascus comes only hours after HTS said they had captured the strategic city of Homs on the way to the capital. Prime Minister Mohammad al-Jalali said he was ready to cooperate with any leadership chosen by the Syrian people. In an interview with Al Arabiya, Jalali also said he had been in contact with opposition commander Abu Muhammad al-Golani to discuss managing the current transitional period, marking a notable development in efforts to shape Syria's political future. The head of the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, Rami Abdul Rahman, said Assad left Syria via Damascus International Airport before the army security forces left the facility. Jordan has urged its citizens to leave neighboring Syria as soon as possible, as have the United States and Assad ally Russia, which both keep troops in Syria. Meanwhile, Malaysia is closely monitoring the evolving situation in Syria and its potential implications for regional stability. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry stated that through the Honorary Consul of Malaysia in Syria, it is actively communicating with Malaysians in Syria. As of now, the Foreign Ministry said all 37 registered Malaysian students and 5 other Malaysians in the country are reported to be safe. The ministry added that it will continue to monitor the situation closely and provide updates as necessary to ensure the safety and well-being of Malaysians. Malaysians in the region are encouraged to register their presence via e-consular to receive their timely updates and assistance if required. The ministry said that any Malaysians requiring consular assistance are urged to contact the Honorary Consul of Malaysia in Syria or the Embassy of Malaysia in Amman. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said he welcomed the end of President Bashar al-Assad's brutal regime. Speaking from Abu Dhabi, where he arrived on Sunday to begin a multi-day trip to the Gulf, Starmer said he welcomed the overthrow of Assad, but it was important to find a political way forward.
Well, it's very early days at the moment. We do need a political solution to this, and that's what we're talking to regional allies about. It is a good thing that Assad is gone, a very good thing for the Syrian people. What we must also ensure as we go through this, the rejection of terrorism and violence, and that civilians are protected, minorities are protected, and that can only be through a political process. That's what we're talking to allies in the region about at the moment.
Echoing the same sentiment, U.S. President Joe Biden said the United States will work with partners and stakeholders in Syria to help seize an opportunity and manage the risk. In remarks at the White House, Biden said the United States will support Syria's neighbors through the period of transition.
We will engage with all Syrian groups, including within the process led by the United Nations, to establish a transition away from the Assad regime toward independent, sovereign, I want to say it again, sovereign Syria, with a new constitution, a new government that serves all Syrians.
Biden said the United States does not officially know of Assad's whereabouts, but noted that he should be held accountable. Meanwhile, Iranian ambassador to Syria, Hossein Akbari, blamed Israel for the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. He accuses opposition force received support and arms from Israel, while suggesting that the Syrian regime also gave up on the fight.
شاید یه سوال جدی هم وجود داشته باشه که خب چرا به زودی، چرا به این سرعت همه چیز معادله عوض شد تو میدان. خب این برمیگرده به یک در واقع شاید تاریخ حدود 15 سال گذشته که خب این ارتش در جنگ طولانی بود، فشارهای متعدد جهانی بود، رژیم صهیونیستی جنایت‌های زیادی رو علیه اینا مرتکب شد، فشارهای زیادی رو آورد، مقدماتی رو فراهم کرد از این ور و از اون ور هم خب به طرف‌ها به در واقع مخالفین امکانات و تجهیزات مدرنی دادن که خیلی از کشورهای شاید پیشرفته دنیا می تجهیزات مدرن رو نداشتن و همین دلیل دولت سوریه و ارتش و مردم تصمیم گرفتن در اینجا خیلی مقاومت نکنن. طبیعتاً وقتی اینها نمیخوان خیلی مقاومت بکنن، شرکای اینها و حلفای اینها هم نمیتونن اونها عملاً نقش جدی رو ایجاد بکنن.
Syria opposition fighters raced into Damascus unopposed on Sunday, overthrowing Assad and ending nearly 6 decades of his family's rule after a lightning advance that reversed the course of a 13-year civil war. Moving on to other stories we're following today, South Korea's main opposition party said Sunday it will try again to impeach President Yoon Suk-yeol after his declaration of martial law. Meanwhile, police arrested the defense minister in charge of the martial law operation and the interior minister resigned. Both of them and Yoon are being investigated for alleged insurrection. Yoon averted impeachment late Saturday as huge crowds braved freezing temperatures in another night of protests outside Parliament to demand the president's ouster. Opposition parties proposed the impeachment motion, which needed 200 votes in the 300-member Parliament to pass, but a near-total boycott of Yoon's People Power Party, or PPP, doomed it to failure. In exchange for blocking his removal from office, Yoon's People Power Party, PPP, said it had effectively obtained Yoon's promise to step down. South Korean Prime Minister Han Duck-soo said this will minimize the confusion to South Korea and its people, stably resolve the political situation and recover liberal democracy. On Saturday, Yoon reappeared for the first time in 3 days and apologized for the anxiety and inconvenience caused by his declaration of martial law. However, he stopped short of stepping down, saying he would leave it to his party to decide on his fate. China's consumer inflation rate slows in November. That and more coming up next.
Welcome to On the Table.
Obviously, there are two main engines of growth in any economies.
What are the implications of Malaysia's growth on employment, income levels, and also standard of living per population?
From a historical perspective, it's been good. The capacity in our country can be built to be in the same level as the world standards.
Welcome back. China's consumer inflation rate slowed in November as demand remains muted in the world's number 2 economy. Now, the country is battling sluggish domestic consumption, a persistent crisis in the property sector, and soaring government debt, all of which threaten Beijing's official growth target for this year. The Consumer Price Index, CPI, a key measure of inflation, rose 0.2% in November year-on-year, down from 0.3% in October, which was below the 0.4% forecast. Beijing has announced in recent months a slew of its most aggressive measures in years, aimed at boosting growth in China, which has struggled to fully recover since the COVID-19 pandemic. China sank into deflation for 4 months at the end of 2023, with the sharpest contraction in consumer prices in 14 years in January. Factory gate prices also slid 2.5% year-on-year in November, compared to a decrease of 2.9% in October. Beijing has unveiled a string of measures since September aimed at bolstering growth, including cutting interest rates, cancelling restrictions on home buying, and easing the debt burden on local governments. However, economists have warned that more direct fiscal stimulus aimed at shoring up domestic consumption is needed to restore full health in China's economy. Russia has stepped up its hybrid warfare tactics in the Baltic Sea. NATO countries in the region should prepare for an extended conflict with Moscow after cables were severed and navigation systems scrambled. Berlin said this week that a Russian cargo ship recently fired signal flares at a German military helicopter, another sign of the mounting tensions in the Baltic Sea, where all of the bordering countries except Russia are now NATO members. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said there is currently an increase of Russian Navy and civilian vessels in the Baltic Sea, and this presence is increasingly significant. Tensions in the region have escalated since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, with European countries regularly expressing concern over hybrid attacks blamed on Russia. The Baltic is in a kind of grey zone between war and peace, where NATO countries have to be ready for harassment of any kind. Analysts say Russia wants to show that it can basically still make it troublesome for NATO to operate in the Baltic. Former President John Mahama, Ghana's main opposition leader, has secured a huge comeback on his third attempt for the presidency after tapping into the country's economic frustrations to win Saturday's election. Now, he tried twice before to win back the country's top post. His win marks a historic victory, making him the first president in the 3 decades of Ghana's Fourth Republic since the 1992 return to multi-party democracy to reclaim the presidency after being voted out. Mahama of the National Democratic Congress NDC party beat out Vice President Mahamudu Bawumia, who represented the ruling New Patriotic Party NPP and who conceded defeat on Saturday. The economy became a major election issue after Ghana defaulted on its debt and entered into a $3 billion deal with the International Monetary Fund. Mahama, 66, who served as president from 2012 to 2017, promised to reset Ghana, renegotiate parts of the IMF deal, and introduce a 24-hour economy to create jobs, a major concern for many younger voters. Meanwhile, Ghana's ruling New Patriotic Party candidate, Vice President Mahamudu Bawumia, said on Sunday that he conceded defeat in the weekend presidential election after calling his opponent John Mahama to congratulate him. He said in a press conference that the people of Ghana have spoken and the people have voted for change at this time, which he respects with all humility.
Ladies and gentlemen,
on his X account, Mahama confirmed he had received Bawumia's congratulatory call. The vice president said Mahama won the presidency decisively, as well as the opposition NDT party winning the country's parliament election, according to the ruling NPP party's own internal tally of votes. Bawumia struggled to distance himself from criticism over the government's handling of Ghana's economic crisis and high costs of living, which became the dominant election issue. With a history of democratic stability, Ghana's two main parties, the NPP and NDC, have alternated in power equally since the return to multi-party politics in 1992.
Elsewhere, Romanian far-right candidate Călin Georgescu and over 100 supporters rallied at a Bucharest polling station to protest against the cancellation of Sunday's presidential election, which a top court annulled after allegations of Russian interference.
Georgescu unexpectedly topped the first round of voting for the presidency on the 24th of November, sparking alarm in the NATO and EU member that borders Ukraine. But his path to possible triumph was barred when the Constitutional Court on Friday annulled the electoral process by ruling it was marred by multiple irregularities and violations of electoral legislation. The annulment follows a spate of intelligence documents declassified by the presidency this week, detailing allegations against Georgescu and Russia, including claims of massive social media promotion and cyber attacks. Georgescu accused the authorities of cancelling the elections for fear that he would win, saying he came to the closed polling station in the name of democracy. Georgescu also called on the cancellation a formalized coup d'etat and said he will be contesting it in court, as is far-right party AUR.
Dutch authorities said on Sunday they believed an explosion, an inferno that caused an apartment block to collapse, killing at least 5 people, was a criminal act.
Rescue workers were combing through the wreckage in a bid to recover bodies from the blast that leveled 5 homes early on Saturday. But the number of people possibly still buried in the debris was unknown. 5 bodies have so far been pulled out of the husk of the 3-story apartment block. 1 person was hauled out still alive and rushed to hospital. There are a total of 4 injured people in hospital, but authorities say the intensity of the blaze made identifying victims only possible via DNA records. This in turn complicated calculations as to how many people could still be missing in the disaster. Hague Police Chief Karin Crooked said investigations were focused on a car seen speeding away from the scene shortly after the explosion. 2 separate teams have been established, one to identify victims and another to investigate what caused the explosion. Crooked, however, warned that the probe would last a long time.
Japanese atomic bomb survivors group Nihon Hidankyo said today a 30-strong delegation will collect its Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo after a crowdfunding campaign to pay their travel costs.
Those going to the 10th December ceremony will include group co-chair Terumi Tanaka, 92, who witnessed the 1945 Nagasaki bombing as a child, as well as other survivors and their children. With money provided by the Nobel Committee not enough to cover the travel expenses of such a large delegation, the group launched a crowdfunding campaign, which has so far raised over 36 million yen, equivalent to about $240,000 US. The grassroots of anti-nuclear organization was established in 1956 and is the only nationwide association of A-bomb survivors, who are known as Hibakusha. The Norwegian Nobel Committee nominated Nihon Hidankyo for its efforts to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons and for demonstrating through witness testimony that nuclear weapons must never be used again.
Now, 2024 is on track to be the hottest year on record and the first to cross 1.5 degrees Celsius, based on a report by the European Union's Copernicus Climate Change Service. Last year, in 2023, the world registered a shocking record of 1.48 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level.
This year is expected to top that, potentially reaching above 1.55 degrees Celsius on average. Nearly 200 countries committed to the Paris Agreement to limit warming to as close to 1.5 degrees Celsius as possible. Carbon dioxide emissions from burning coal, oil and gas are the main cause of global warming. Now, countries at November's COP29 summit in Baku adopted a $300 billion a year global finance target to help poorer nations cope with the impacts of climate change, a deal its intended recipients criticized as woefully insufficient. According to the 2024 UN Emissions Gap Report, the world is currently on track for as much as 3.1 degrees Celsius of warming by the end of this century, with global greenhouse gas emissions and fossil fuel use continuing to rise.
Musician and producer Jay-Z was accused in a lawsuit submitted Sunday of sexually assaulting a 13-year-old with hip-hop star Sean Combs in the year 2000. Jay-Z has since denied the claims. An updated complaint in a civil case against Combs alleges that Jay-Z, whose name is Sean Carter, and Combs assaulted the girl at an after-party following the MTV Video Music Awards in September of 2000.
Jay-Z had originally been identified in the complaint as Celebrity A, the update lawsuit states, accusing Carter of filing a frivolous countersuit. The plaintiff is not identified in the lawsuit. Jay-Z fired back at the lawyer bringing the case, accusing him of being a deplorable human. Carter, 55, is a billionaire record producer and entrepreneur who started out as a rapper and is now married to superstar Beyonce. Meanwhile, a rapper Combs, known as Diddy, has separately been charged with sex trafficking and racketeering. Federal prosecutors allege that Combs, 55, sexually abused women and coerced them into drug-fueled sex parties using threats and violence. He has pled not guilty to all charges, and his criminal trial is currently slated to begin on 5th May 2025.
Still to come in sports, Malaysia forced to a draw against Cambodia in ASEAN Cup.
Melaksanakan misi, mempertahan maruah, mencipta secara setia pertembungan, takkan jenta dengan asalkan memburu peluang bersedekan satu perjuangan, satu suara akan yang direncanakan dada dalam memburu tangkap keaduan, dengan berbicara membebaskan sampai kenalan.
Kicking off our sports segment this afternoon, Malaysia had to settle for a 2-2 draw against Cambodia in their first match of the 2024 ASEAN Cup at the National Olympic Stadium in Phnom Penh on Sunday. An equaliser by Fergus Tierney salvaged a point for Malaysia, though coach Paul Marti Vicente said that the commitment showed by his men was not enough.
What seemed to be a lopsided match after Malaysia took the lead in the 35th minute through Sabah FC player Stuart John Wilkins heated up in the second half as both teams did their best to secure victory and the full 3 points. Malaysia would have gone up in the dying minutes of the first half, but poor finishing at the goal mouth failed to yield any positive results for them. Fresh from halftime, Cambodia clawed their way back when Koulibaly Abdul Qadir slotted the equaliser in the 52nd minute, which then triggered a change in the tempo of the game. Buoyed by the support from the home crowd, Cambodia ramped up the game with a second goal when T. Sa scored in the 60th minute. However, Harimau Malaya were not deterred and Tierney struck back with the team's second goal in the 74th minute mark, leaving both teams at 2-2 until the final whistle. Malaysia is in Group A along with defending champions Thailand, Singapore and Timor-Leste. Group B comprises Indonesia, Laos, Myanmar, the Philippines and Vietnam.
And And in Premier League news, Arsenal were forced to settle for a 1-1 draw against Fulham. The Gunners, who were on a 4-match winning streak, were halted in West London.
Arsenal was still without influential defensive pair Gabriel Magalhaes and Ricardo Calafiori through injury, and Fulham exposed a makeshift left side of the Gunners' backline to take the lead. Kenny Tete's ball in behind was pounced on by Raul Jimenez, who drove forward and fired brilliantly across David Raya into the far corner on 11 minutes mark. Arsenal underlined their threat from set pieces when they scored twice from corners to beat Manchester United 2-0 in midweek. Yet, for all their preparations, Fulham was still powerless to prevent the Corner Kings from striking again. William Saliba stabbed home Kai Havertz's header from close range for Arsenal's 23rd goal from corners since the beginning of last season. Now, the result left Arsenal second in the table on 29 points, ahead of third-placed Chelsea's late game against Tottenham Hotspur.
And in another match, Tottenham Hotspur's manager Ange Postecoglou urged his side to show more discipline after blowing an early 2-0 lead to lose 4-3 at home to Chelsea on Sunday. Now, the Spurs have won just once in 7 games in all competitions, piling pressure on Postecoglou's position.
Dominic Solanke and Dejan Kulusevski had given Tottenham a perfect start inside 11 minutes. However, Jadon Sancho and Enzo Fernandez levelled the game before halftime to put pressure on the hosts. Cole Palmer scored twice from the penalty spot in the second half to turn the game around. Son did pull a goal back in stoppage time, but the Spurs captain accepted responsibility for the defeat. A 4th consecutive Premier League win for Chelsea moves them to within 4 points of leaders Liverpool. Tottenham remained down in the 11th, and defeat was compounded by the loss of influential centre-back Christian Romero, who had only just returned from injury.
And in other Premier League news, Dan Ashworth has left his role as a sporting director at Manchester United after 5 months in the job by mutual agreement. The 53-year-old arrived in July from Newcastle United to much fanfare, but the decision to part ways was made after Saturday's 3-2 home loss to Nottingham Forest.
Ashworth had played a key part in reshaping the club following Jim Ratcliffe's purchase of a minority share and has overseen major decisions. His shock departure comes after United lured him away from Newcastle following lengthy talks in which Ashworth was put on garden leave. It was reported that United paid Newcastle around £10 million to secure his services. While Ratcliffe once described Ashworth as one of the top sporting directors in the world, the decision on his departure was engineered by the Ineos boss and comes less than a month after the hiring of Ruben Amorim as head coach.
And that wraps up World Today this time round. In our top story, Bashar al-Assad granted political asylum in Russia. I'm Mohana Priya. Malaysia Madani, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Thank you for your company.
bagaimana sihat sejahtera, makan makanan berkhasiat untuk badan sihat tinggi dan kuat. Cegahlah sebelum merana, besar cergas cerdas sentiasa. Anak Malaysia tinggi, sihat selamanya.